Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first topic we'll be discussing today on the podcast, here on the Warhawk stream, together with Kermit and Hochi, and that is the situation in Iran. We will look at the blockade of the blockade, but maybe we could start with the new ceasefire when Israel and Lebanon declared a ceasefire. But right here I see a headline, Israel killed 13 people in Lebanon despite the ceasefire. So what is happening now in Lebanon or in the southern part of Lebanon? What is the situation? If you could focus on that, Kermit, and introduce us to what's going on.
Well, you're asking the right person, but we know what the situation was in the Middle East, with Israel launching another renewed offensive into southern Lebanon, where, by the way, an interesting thing happened. Apple Maps mysteriously erased all the names of towns and villages in southern Lebanon.
Because they're not there anymore.
Coincidence?
Well, I don't think so, but the point is that Israel is literally destroying and demolishing those villages, so those villages are basically ceasing to exist. I know.
They're just going along with them, keeping things out of sight, out of mind.
And like Jews control Apple?
That's what you said, not me.
Okay, so Jews don't control Apple, but wink, we all kind of know, right? No, of course. What could it be about? Why do you think this happened, since you mentioned it? What's your feeling about this? Because obviously there's some business thing behind it.
That's it. I think Apple is just siding with Israel. I'm not starting any conspiracy theories about what I think, but I think Apple is just siding with Israel because Apple sides with the American government and the American government sides with Israel. I'd call it a cascading effect.
Okay, that makes sense. It's definitely about money, of course, so if Apple doesn't want to antagonize the American or Israeli government, it would be quite interesting to look at what the market share is for Apple versus Android, for example, specifically in Israel, to see if by any chance Apple doesn't have a dominant position there. Here's the thing.
I think that Apple will definitely have a dominant position in Israel, but I think that's probably completely irrelevant because you have to compare Israel with Lebanon. I think that Lebanon will definitely have fewer iPhones than Israel.
I understand. So basically you could say that money decided which side the evil corporation would take.
Yes.
So the truce was broken. Am I right in understanding that at this point there is no truce anymore? Okay?
And let's put it this way, after Donald Trump started tweeting that he brokered another truce, so I said that the truce wouldn't last even a day, let alone 10 days. And when I looked at it this afternoon and counted it, it didn't even last 30 minutes.
The question is how to take it, right? Because, for example, in Ukraine, there was also an Easter truce, and there were thousands of violations of that truce. There was shooting, people were being killed. So how do you see it? Does a violation of the truce mean, in your opinion, the end of the truce?
Well, probably not. Just because you violate the truce doesn't automatically mean it ends, unless that's how it was signed.
Here, Netanyahu confirmed the truce between Israel and Lebanon announced by Trump. That's a 15-hour-old report. And then there's a report that's 20 minutes old, and that's actually a report that Israel was killing people in Lebanon. I can refresh it. It's probably older now. Yeah, so it's not actually 20 minutes old, right? It updates every time they add something. So I think
that the report came in sometime around 4 in the morning our time.
All right.
Yeah, like the thing is that Israel simply doesn't perceive any authority over that Lebanese territory because they claim that they agreed to the ceasefire with the Lebanese government. But the problem is that the Lebanese government doesn't actively control this territory because it's actually controlled by Hezbollah, which has the majority there. And most importantly, they have their own militia there. So then we can question whether it even makes sense to talk about a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon when Lebanon simply doesn't control this area.
I understand your argument is that the ceasefire is between the Israeli government, the Israeli state, and the Lebanese state. But effectively, in the area where the fighting is happening, the Lebanese state has no control at all and exists there only legally, but not de facto.
Yes.
That makes sense, yeah. At that moment, on the other hand, we can ask whether, when Israel starts bombing Hezbollah positions, it's a violation of the ceasefire that was agreed with Lebanon. Yeah, we can turn it around, because if we're saying that Lebanon doesn't actually have control there, then bombing Lebanon in places where Lebanon doesn't have control isn't really bombing Lebanon.
Well, theoretically it isn't, but practically it is because the state of Lebanon has some territorial integrity.
Yeah, so the other way around, practically it isn't, but legally it is.
Yeah, like that, yes.
No, go on.
Yeah, just because you don't have control over the territory doesn't mean that if you attack it, it won't be considered an attack on that state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have an interesting problem there, because basically, legally, Lebanon is there. So when you attack there, you're attacking Lebanon if there's an agreement with Lebanon. But in reality, Lebanon isn't actually there. So when you attack there, or even if you make an agreement, peace still won't prevail, because peace isn't agreed with those who actually have the military presence there. So even when you're attacking Lebanon, you're not really attacking Lebanon, but at the same time, even if you're not effectively attacking Lebanon, you're legally attacking Lebanon.
Yes, I would put it exactly like that myself.
Great. It's obviously the simplest and smoothest situation in history. Okay. Isn't it actually similar to when we look at the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, where basically when the Ukrainians attack them, they're de facto attacking Russians, but legally they're attacking their own people, for example? It's actually similar, isn't it?
Yes. It's a bit different, yes, there is a similarity, but as far as I know, legally it's still Ukrainian territory that the Russians are occupying.
All right. That comparison is a bit shaky. I just wanted to find a similar parallel, something similarly messy from another situation. But it didn't really work here. We'd need some territory that's de facto controlled by a terrorist organization or rebels, but legally is part of some state. It's hard to say how Taiwan would be considered in this context, right? If we digress a bit to Taiwan now, wouldn't it actually be a similar, though of course completely different, but still similar situation, where, for example, if there was a dispute between companies from the United States and mainland China, neither side recognizes the existence of the state of Taiwan, right?
I don't think so, because America maintains the one China policy.
Yes, so basically Taiwan is a rebellious province occupied by some of those insurgents. At the moment when China would attack there or something like that, then it would actually be attacking its own territory held by insurgents, and no one could say that it attacked a foreign country, right? Legally.
No, you're not right, because the problem is that the communist regime carried out a coup against the Republic of China.
Well, like, that means
That the rebels would attack the original country.
sure, but according to the UN, China is China. Yeah, the communist China is the real China at this moment. I think it changed in the 70s when Taiwan stopped being recognized as China and the communists started being recognized as China. So according to international law, it's the way I say it is.
86.
Or something like that. That early, yeah. Well,
I had 81.
aha, so no. So you got it.
The People's Republic of China joined the UN.
Yeah, so I had it right. It was the 70s. I wanted to say 73, but it was actually 71. But back to what's happening in Lebanon. Do we know how many casualties there are at this moment, or how intense the fighting is? Since the last time we talked about it, because there was quite a big massacre there. Hundreds of people dying every day. It's calmed down now. Relatively speaking, only 14 people today, if I put it bluntly. The Israelis seem to be acting quite ruthlessly in that part of the world, don't they?
Since they're capturing villages like the Russians in Ukraine, it's very ruthless.
We have a post here from Trump on Truth Social. Trump banned Israel from bombing Lebanon 2 hours ago. Interesting. How much influence does Trump currently have on Israel?
None?
None.
I mean, there might be a little something there, but honestly, when you let Tiger off the leash, Tiger's not going to come back to you willingly.
There's something to that.
I'd use his favorite comparison. It's an influence that's approaching zero.
Approaching zero, that's nice. And when we're talking about an influence that's approaching zero, there's a pretty nice red zero showing up for the number of tankers safely passing through the Hormuz Strait. There's something sailing there, but it's mostly safe because something very interesting happened there. Basically, Iran hasn't actually declared any blockade. They said that a toll would be charged for safe passage. But the United States declared a blockade of that blockade and said they would detain ships sailing from Iran that have sanctioned goods or sanctioned oil on board, or those ships that paid the toll, so it applies to them. There's a bit of a problem in that some ships are passing through. For example, if they're Chinese ships, then of course the blockade has the issue that if the Chinese wanted to take it seriously, they could send their warships there and we would see whether the blockade works or not. I dare say that the Americans wouldn't risk it if the Chinese, for example, from Djibouti, sent some warships there to check it out. What do you think? If they set out to escort some of their ships that, according to the American blockade, should be detained. Sorry?
Are you talking about testing the American or the Iranian blockade now?
No, the American one, because with the Iranians, the Chinese are working together, I'd say pretty clearly.
But the problem comes down to two things. Trump did announce a breakthrough deal with the Iranians that if the Israelis keep the peace, then the strait will open for all free navigation and trade. But that's a theoretical thing. The practical issue comes when the Iranian Revolutionary Guards announce that they will open it. But you have to ask the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to allow you to pass. Yeah, so that's the first thing that's problematic. That means Iran will continue to control the strait through this.
Sure, but then there's the argument that when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard allows you, and they only allow you when you load their oil or pay the toll, then at that moment the Americans should detain you and not let you go any further. So, effectively, the American blockade blocks Iran's blockade with the aim of taking away Iran's geopolitical power to shamelessly dictate who can or cannot pass through. This was something I thought the Americans couldn't do, that if the Americans started a blockade and began seizing ships that the Iranians let through, it would become an act of war against the countries those ships come from, or effectively piracy. Which is something we can say Iran is capable of doing because they can justify it by saying the Americans started the war. They can talk their way around it, so in reality there's no blockade or piracy, it's just their defense. But the Americans can't use that excuse because they had the option not to start the war, or they have the option to end it, but instead they effectively chose a naval blockade and seizing ships that refused to meet their demands, or stopping those ships, which I think can be seen, or definitely is, a violation of international law and could even be considered state piracy, in my opinion.
The main problem is that America, even though it declared a blockade, can't enforce it by force because it's in international waters. Or waters that are considered to belong to Iran. That's the first thing. The second thing is they can't enforce it by force, because if they started shooting at some merchant ship, let's say from China, it would seriously anger China, and then China would really show them what a blockade means. That's like a pointless blockade.
So you could say it's exactly as I thought, that they actually can't use force effectively, because at that moment they'd be causing problems, setting up issues like piracy, acts of war, and things like that. So they're basically just there, maybe monitoring the situation, and they can say, okay, if you go any further, you can never sail to the United States again, you'll be sanctioned or something like that.
It's more about the fact that America has declared they're going to block it, but they simply can't block it. That they can't do it? Well, they can't.
But at that moment, they would be violating international law and would effectively be declaring war on the country whose ship they seized, right? Because they had already seized ships before, but those were shadow fleet ships, and you can seize a shadow fleet ship. It's not even supposed to be on the sea in the first place. But to seize a legal ship, one that has everything in order, that's an act of war or an act of piracy. So it's definitely a violation of international treaties and so on.
Iran will be really happy if the United States does the job for them, right?
Also,
Well, that probably won't lower oil prices if the United States is enforcing a blockade and making even more bottlenecks.
And whether a gallon of diesel costs $30 or 10, right?
And that brings us to what's currently happening with the tankers, because right now, the last tankers that were loaded before the war started should be arriving in Europe, and now the flow of diesel supplies should start to dry up. Is that right?
No. Which means that only now, when something gets closed or messed up, only now will we feel it for real, only now is the strait effectively closed.
It's kind of like how sunlight takes 8 minutes to reach us after it's emitted, so only now is the oil crisis actually reaching us. But that doesn't matter, because we have price caps at 43 crowns per liter, right?
Yes, that doesn't bother us.
So it's fine, we're okay. We have cheap diesel because Andrei Babish said it would be cheap.
More than I am, especially at the central oil storage facility. And so far, everyone there seemed quite happy, so I think we have nothing to worry about for now.
There will be enough oil, but it will be costly. We'll pay for it through taxes or at the pump, but with our government, taxes are more likely. Or in debt. Being in debt would probably be the most effective way, actually. Like, if the state should go into debt for something, maybe it should be for this, but the price definitely shouldn't be lowered so much that it leads to a shortage. It has to be balanced, and if they want to put a cap on it, I don't know, maybe 3 crowns below the market price at most, you know? Definitely not like 50% below the market price or something like that. That would already lead to a shortage.
but putting a cap on it isn't a bad economic move.
If it's short-term and reasonable, and not if you do it for a year, for example.
Yes, that's also true, as we could see in Hungary. But the point is, it has to be set up in some way. Not just like now everyone will simply sell for this much. This will be the minimum and this will be the maximum, for example. Because when the state determines it, the maximum amount is wrong, and the lowest, the minimum amount is wrong. Because it doesn't respond directly to the market.
It changes, if I'm not mistaken, once a day, right? The state. They have a rule like that there, right?
Every day it's new.
Yes, every day the state announces a new maximum possible price of gasoline. Which I find quite reasonable in the sense that you actually don't know long term in advance what the price will be. So in a way, it still gives the gas station owners some freedom to set it lower to attract customers if they bet that the price will be lower the next day, but it's more like a bit of a lottery. But again, it's kind of Again, it kind of reminds me a bit of the COVID situation where every day you have new rules, whether you need a mask or not, where and when you can shop and so on. And I think we're heading towards a situation where actually Andrej Babiš will be announcing every day that today the price of gasoline and diesel is this much, motorcycles can refuel only at 10 trucks only in the evening, and passenger cars up to 3.5 tons have a window between 12 and 2 p.m. But only half a tank max, it will just be like that again.
The fundamental problem is that the maximum price absolutely doesn't correspond with the market development, right? Like that gentleman said last week, or I don't know if it was last week, on Mate Slovo, gas stations buy fuel based on some weekly moving average, and if they buy it when for 3 weeks in a row the price just goes up. If during the week the commodity rises by 2 crowns, then you have to count on it going up by another 2 crowns the next week, so you raise the price by 4. And at that moment,
if the gas stations have a problem, then it would be appropriate for the state to cover their losses, right?
well, but the state won't do that, right? We need to have enough money for our people, not for some gas stations.
So at that point, it leads to small gas station owners going out of business, and then Orlen, MOL, and other big fuel corporations will take over here.
That's also happening, that small gas stations have to close because they're simply not able to. The state can't. The state can order you to cap the price, but according to the law, the state can't force you to sell at a loss. At that point, you have every right to close and not sell.
That actually makes sense. That actually makes sense to me. It's probably better than just selling at a loss and then being forced to sell it off to some corporation here right at that moment.
And if the Ministry of Finance, or at least in their promotional materials, thinks that the real price is 56 CZK per liter of diesel and lowers it by 10 CZK, then all the distributors will be crying soon because their margin isn't that big.
Well, if they're lowering it by 10 CZK, that means they're making gasoline or diesel cheaper. It's hard to say exactly what, though. That's about 20% compared to the market price.
They're not reducing it from a specific amount. That's just their claim that without the cap, diesel would be 58 CZK per liter. But we know that before the price increase, it wasn't like that. That even before the price cap, we know that before the cap at some gas stations, the fuel was actually cheaper than the government cap, right? It often happened that the gas stations just raised the price by a crown to match the government cap.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually how they made money, or at least survived. Those small gas stations that are closing now, they competed with the big ones by having really low prices because maybe they had low rent and were located somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, you know.
No.
Whereas an Orlen gas station, which has high rent somewhere by the highway, of course, it has to be more expensive. And so it was worth it for drivers to get off the highway, go about 5 kilometers away and fill up somewhere in a village, about 5 crowns cheaper, right? Which at this moment is no longer possible.
I'll send you a picture here in the chat. That's from yesterday. That's for tomorrow.
All right. According to the drawing under the supervision of a state notary, tomorrow the price will be 41 crowns for gasoline and 43 for diesel. That's great. Hopefully they won't get higher numbers tomorrow. They won't draw them.
Because this occurs Monday through Friday.
I understand. Anyway, since we're talking about gas prices already, and about the fact that the flow of diesel and oil from Hormuz to Europe is kind of drying up, where are those tankers going? Where are they going? They're going to the United States. The latest report was that about 171 supertankers are heading to the Gulf of Mexico. Yes. To the Texas coast and to Texas ports, and that they're going to be sucking up American oil there, and apparently it's a huge victory for the American people who are now going to make a lot of money. So I think I have an idea where the problem lies. Just if you have anything to add before I get into it.
The problem, that dog has long since breathed its last, and what's left is just lying there.
Okay, thank you for your input. But no, the point here is that America is currently exporting more oil than it ever has before. But it can't fully make up for the shortfall from Hormuz, right? And it's not that it can't make up for it because it doesn't have the reserves or anything like that, but it just doesn't. It just doesn't have that kind of production. It would have to increase production, which drill, baby, drill, basically never happened in America because increasing extraction lowers the price of oil. And why the hell would you lower the price of your own oil? You won't do that. You just accumulate extraction permits and save them for the future. That's exactly what they did. Instead of the drillers, instead of starting to extract more, they just shelved it so they can extract the same amount of oil for a longer period, if you know what I mean.
Well, they'll extract more, but they just won't sell the oil.
No, they'll extract more, but they won't extract that amount of oil in a week. They'll extract it over a year, And they won't have to deal with permits because instead of just using 100 permits for extraction, for massive extraction during a week, they'll nicely spread those 100 permits over the whole year, and they'll be sure they can extract all year long. Yeah, to put it simply, it doesn't work exactly like that, but if I use this kind of example...
Sorry, that way you won't disrupt the market and the price won't go down, right?
Exactly, and you'll make more money. And since the situation in Hormuz is uncertain and unstable, there's basically no pressure in America that would force the producers to extract more, right? Because they suspect or still think that if the situation in Hormuz is resolved in a month or in half a year, then their investments in oil wells and expanding production might not pay off. And that's why they'd rather wait to see if it makes sense or not, right? Which is the first point of why America doesn't really make that much money on those tankers. The second point is that America doesn't have the infrastructure capable of refining more of that oil. And there's exactly the same problem with the refineries. You won't build too many refineries for no reason because then there wouldn't be anything to refine, right? That's another risky investment. And then there's the third point, which is the logistics itself. They don't have enough ports where they could load the oil. Yeah, so these are the three reasons why America can't fully replace the shortfall from Hormuz. And since they can't fully replace the shortfall from Hormuz, meaning they can't increase production, it means that if those tankers come and start sucking up the gasoline, diesel, and oil, there won't be enough gasoline, diesel, and oil in America because we'll suck it up, since we'll be willing to pay more because we need it, while in America, well, they have it, right? And we have this existential crisis, especially the Chinese, Asians, and so on. They have this existential crisis, which will lead to a brutal increase in diesel and gasoline prices in America, because we, Europe and Asia, will actually become competitors to the people who get gasoline and diesel from gas stations in America. Do you get it? That's interesting.
Well, what can I say? I guess you're right, but we'll see.
What really interests me about this is whether you think America could actually profit from all this in some way, or if my argument is right that Europe and Asia will just become competitors over a limited pool of oil, which will only benefit the oil producers, but taxpayers in America will end up paying more, so they won't gain anything from it. American?
But the only one who have actually profited from this so far was Baron Trump, who bought cheap oil before the war started. At the first peace deal, when the price skyrocketed, he sold it 30 minutes before the peace agreement was signed. When the fighting started again, he bought it again, and now that the price has gone up, he sold it again. The first transaction was for $30 million.
Mm-hmm. No?
So
it's
such a great, insightful read.
And at this moment, when we're talking about Europeans sucking up American oil, of course, the ones who will profit are the oil producers, because they'll have a market at a high price. The refineries will profit from it. The oil industry will make money from it. That's clear, but it's hard to say if any of that will trickle down to the people on the street or outside the oil industry. From what I know about America, usually not much trickles down from those billionaires, from those oil magnates, Most of it just stays somewhere, stays buried in concrete. What?
Chaklop says that's how it works, that if you lower taxes for billionaires, it will eventually trickle down, and they'll also lower the tax burden for the poorest people. That's definitely how it works.
That's not how it works, and we know it.
Well, we know that. We know that.
All right, then. So the only thing America could do, for example, would be to tax these extraordinary profits of the oil industry and use the collected money to help people, or to cap, for example, prices at gas stations.
They won't do that.
They won't do that.
They won't do that. Why would they?
The elections are coming up.
Then it's the midterms.
Yeah, sure, but it'll be a signal.
For roughly the last 100 years, every party that won the presidency has then faced the midterms 2 years later. And when they had the majority, they lost that majority. It's always been that way. If you look, when they elected Biden as president for the Democratic Party, the Democrats had the majority in Congress. And in the midterms, they lost that majority. Yeah, Republicans got the majority. And now that there's a Republican president again, it looks like the Republicans will lose their majority in Congress again.
Sure, but it's not just about Congress, it's also about the Senate, right? And they might not necessarily lose it there, but there's a big risk that they could. Yeah, and then there's a good question whether they have the motivation, or maybe more motivation, to leave Texas, for example, untaxed, so that Texas actually profits from this situation since oil is being extracted there, and that way they secure those votes and don't help the Democrats. Because if they taxed it there, saying that profits from Dallas and Texas companies would be used to subsidize gasoline in California, for example, they could lose Texas because of that, right?
Sorry to interrupt you, but I want to go back to one thing. When we're talking about those oil producers now, they can't be completely happy about this either.
About what? No.
Well, of course, I mean from this situation. Yes, like oil has gotten more expensive, that's a fact, and let's say an American Texas oil producer is rubbing his hands now because he can sell for twice as much. But a lot of those producers, especially from the Middle East, must be really unhappy because they're sitting on huge, inaccessible wealth and basically aren't able to sell it.
Well, of course, but right now I'm trying to speak for the American producers. That producers in the Arab world are basically suicidal right now. That's obvious, we know that.
I just wanted to point out the other side, that not all producers are the same.
Yes, but I was trying to focus on the American producers. Look, let's try to wrap this up somehow. Right now, there's a very fragile truce. The Americans aren't really solving much with their blockade. We'll see if it leads to anything. And the tankers heading to America will cause gas prices to rise for Americans. It'll make the situation in America worse. But theoretically, it could help us out of a tight spot here in Europe. Here, the problem with oil isn't just that it's expensive, but there's a real risk that if we don't replace it from America or other sources, we might not have any at all. And the situation is even worse, for example, in Japan. China is fine. China has huge oil reserves. So actually, in a way, if China adopts, let's say, a more restrained approach, it could survive on those reserves for about half a year.
Yeah, I guess so. I'd probably agree. The only ones really excited about this oil price are the Russians, who are laughing, and it's not like it's going to save them completely, as you say, but it will definitely help them out. From what I've seen, just since the war in Iran started with America, they've made a little over 30 million, but I'd better look it up. $350 billion extra.
Well, fortunately, it doesn't show on the battlefield, so for now it's useless to them.
Yes.
It's useless to them, but how should I put it? Well, it won't save them, but it will delay their fall. Maybe that's how I would put it.
You see, at least there will be more content for a while, and with this cynical message, I might end our Iran-America oil update. Today was very American, just very typical. Ropa, písek a Američani. What is closer together than these three things? And now we're going to chat with the chat for a bit, and soon we'll move on to the next segment, the next part of our podcast. The topic of internal American politics and the conflict between Americans and the Pope. That will be fun as well. All right, see you in the next segment, and thank you for your participation so far. Let's see what the chat is saying.